they could see that it could make a difference. It was worthwhile getting involved. I don't know to what extent we can say that of a lot of the processes we put in place. In terms of the delegates that went to the strategic assemblies, in which, by the way, change every year. This is an annual process, so that there is no entrenchment, so that there is no career PB delegates, so that every year new citizens get to do the delegate job on behalf of their fellow citizens. And the PB councillors, which is another layer, I didn't get into it not to get into the complexity, but again, you can see the overrepresentation of most categories. Now, how has this been translated to the UK? Very quickly, this is the definition of PB by the PB unit down south, which is now being reinvented, and it's called the PB network. Participatory budgeting directly involves local people in making decisions on the spending and priorities defined for a defined public budget. And usually this can happen by geographical area, or it might happen by theme, health, transport. It means, and they insist on this, and I think they are right to do so, it means engaging residents and community groups, not just representatives, but citizens themselves directly as well, from all parts of the community, to discuss and decide, and it's important the discuss part, and I'll come back to that in a second, and make spending proposals that then are voted on before the final budget is agreed and goes through the normal institutional channels. In the Porto Alegre case that we saw, there were points in time in which 21% of all public expenditure was allocated through that kind of process. Can you imagine that here? It seems pretty unthinkable. It's not long ago, there was a campaign to get 1% of public finances allocated in this way, and people were already pretty scared. So, talking about 21% of all public expenditure may make some people feel quite uncomfortable, but that's how it was in the original model. And then there is some role in scrutinizing and monitoring the process. The uses are, the most popular ones are as a way of allocating community grants. It's a different model. This has been done in Leith, in Edinburgh, in Kirkcaldy, and other places in Scotland as well. It can be as well a way of allocating a percentage of an area budget. So in Tower Hamlets in London, they put aside £2.5 million for a PB process a few years ago. It can be done by pooling budgets. So here, if we think about community planning partnerships, the different partners around the table pooling a particular budget to tackle a particular social problem or to try and invest in a particular area or community. So it can be a neighborhood, or it can be a theme or a service. And some examples are the recent Carry Me Kosh. I would love to have an Edinburgh accent to do that properly, but my best imitation never works. So that was done by eBook, and it was a very interesting little process with £40,000, but an interesting and well managed process. Now, so this is how it's been translated. You can see the differences between the original model and the UK model. There has been an evaluation that some colleagues, Anna Roque, has taken a look at the UK as a whole, including Scotland, and the headline is, there have been results, but not the huge impact that we have seen in other places. For instance, in Spain, in Cordoba, they have a more similar process to the original model. What I would say is, of course, we cannot expect that a more minimalist version of PB is going to produce the shocking and incredible results that the maximalist version of PB produced in Brazil, of course. But in general, there were still overall interesting impacts. The positive feedback, participants enjoy it. The improvement of relationships and self-confidence. The intergenerational understanding, something really important in Scotland, I believe. But greater involvement, and this process usually generate further involvement, and the formation of new groups and building of social capital in communities. A better awareness of councillors and the work that they do. And this is an not to say that the original model is best and anything else is not. It's not about that. It's about saying it's about choices and the kind of how we adapt these innovations for them to work for us here in Scotland. But some of the key differences, and this applies also to Germany and France to some extent, with Spain being the exception and being a bit closer to the original model. But the contrast here is, as Donald Dior famously said in Brazil, he said it was a process, not an event. Whereas here we tend to think of it as a community event. In there, it's actually a process that can take up to 3 months. In the Brazilian model, there are the neighborhood assemblies, the thematic assemblies, the municipal committee, whereas here we have the one-day event typically. Very importantly, the third row, in that original model, there are presentations and there is deliberation, and then there is voting. And why is it important to talk about things before voting? In my view, that's the thing that's the key factor that produces transformation. As I said before, it is only when you get confronted with the needs of the other, who is really different from you and who lives in a world that is really different from yours, only then you can make the breakthrough of beginning to work in partnership and beyond silos. And that's when you can begin to think, right, hold on, no, we don't need a new park here. We want to channel resources to that area that has been struggling with that particular issue for years. And that's one of the key elements in the Porto Alegre model. Suddenly the upper and middle classes were prepared to put on hold some of their privileges and channel resources to the poorest areas. And the model was designed in that way, so that with the consent of everyone, after having been exposed to that other that we don't often meet in our everyday lives, and coming together and coming out with solutions. So that's why it's important to discuss before voting. Because otherwise, if you just go and vote, it just becomes a contest. There's no exposure and understanding and learning about the issues, about the trade-offs, about the difficult decisions that need to be made because we have limited budgets, and about the real difficulties that many communities face and the decisions we need to make to balance how we channel resources. Citizens can do that and do it well when they are given the opportunity. And finally, in that original model, it became a way of governing, and still goes on in many cities in Brazil. Whereas here we tend to say that's just a smaller way of allocating funding. These are just some challenges, very quickly, before I get to my slide on conclusions. The key challenges is to reshape mindsets and ways of working and thinking. It requires commitment from everyone, or it won't work. Cross-party support, key, and facilitative leadership. And what that means is that moving on from the traditional model of leadership where the leader knows best and knows the direction to a model of leadership in which a leader